Welcome, everyone, to the Empower You podcast. I'm Dr. Steve Holt, and we are really going to be blessed today to have Melissa Ohden with us, who is an abortion survivor. And we don't hear about that, Melissa. We don't hear about abortion survivors. You've also written a book called You Carried Me, and you talk about the fact that God was sovereign even over what you've been through. And we're just appreciative that you would take time to be with us today. So thank you for being here. Colorado Springs. You're in Colorado Springs. So.
One of my favorite places, and I don't ski.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So you don't carry those big bags with all the skis when you go down to get your baggage?
No. Yeah. I love Colorado Springs, not only for the views, but I mean, the ministry is just such a blessing.
Well, you've been on Focus on the Family. You've been on Fox News. You've been on Tucker Carlson. A lot of different people are and organizations are finding out about you and what you're doing. And so we're fascinated to hear your story. I was just reading some stuff today and saw that you did not even know that you were a survivor of an abortion until you're 14 years old. Tell me a little bit about your story and what you've been through.
I guess we should start and say, what is an abortion survivor? Because sometimes people hear that and they think, she's a woman who had an abortion. I'm actually not. I'm a baby who survived an abortion procedure. And that is shocking to people because you don't find it talked about in the culture or in the media. Sometimes it's whispered in families, but for most of us, yes, it is this kind of deep secret that we keep. And you're right, I didn't know my story of surviving an abortion procedure until I was 14. I'm a Midwest girl, born and raised, even though the mountains call me. I'm from Iowa originally, now live in Kansas City. Let's not talk about football today. We are Midwestern people, and that's where my story began. My birth mother was forced to have an abortion as a college student. As we talk about stories that often aren't heard, we don't hear the stories of women like my birth mother who aren't given any choice when it comes to abortion. I think choice is such a loaded word, and it triggers an emotional response out of people. We see that in the culture war, but at the end of the day, statistics tell us that about 64% of women report feeling pressured into their abortion. And there's never been a space for women like my birth mother. And frankly, she wasn't just coerced. She was literally forced against her will to abort me. And we as a society should hear those kind of words. And we should be standing up and saying, oh no, we failed her. And I don't mean her as in me, I mean yes, but we failed that woman. Why weren't we there for her? How did we miss her? And, in my birth mother's case, it was people who should have been providing her with unconditional love and support that were responsible for it. I now know it was her mother, my maternal grandmother, who forced that abortion. They scientifically knew when life begins, they biblically knew the truth about the sanctity and dignity and value of every human life. But my grandmother, as a prominent nurse in Sioux City, Iowa, knew how to make a secret forced abortion take place. And so that's what happened to my birth mom. She was engaged to my birth father, madly in love, and facing an unplanned pregnancy, was forced into a hospital and had a saline infusion abortion forced upon her against her will. And I know when people hear that, they go, wait a minute, she was 19, she was an adult. Why didn't she? No, please don't say, why didn't she? Because the specifics of it are pretty horrific. Nobody wants to know how all of this happened. What I can tell you is that she wasn't given any other choice. And that procedure was the most common one performed back in the 1970s. It involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the baby in the womb. And the intent of that solution was to poison and scald the child to death. So if the child was, in other people's words, fortunate enough, their life was usually ended within about 24 hours, and then they would induce labor in the rest of the time with the intent of that deceased child then being expelled from the womb. And we actually know through my medical records that the abortion took way longer than 24 hours or 72. It actually took place over 5 days. They just kept trying time and time again to induce my birth mother's labor, and they weren't successful until the 5th day. I now know they started to think my birth mother might lose her life in that abortion procedure because it was just taking too long. And of course, they believed that it would end my life. That's what it was intended to do. The longer I soaked in that toxic salt solution, the greater the likelihood was that my life was ended. And so it was absolutely shocking and surprising to people when on the 5th day, they induced my birth mom's labor and I was born alive.
But what happened?
Right.
I mean, what happened from there?
And how does that happen, right? That tends to be a question of why were you born alive after being poisoned and scalded for 5 days? I don't know all the answers to that. I believe in a sovereign God, most definitely. There is no medical reason why somebody like me exists, except we also know now that that abortionist had not performed an adequate medical exam on my birth mother. My medical records state that he thought she was about 18 to 20 weeks pregnant. But the fact that I weighed almost 3 pounds, I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces. A neonatologist remarked in one part of my medical records, he thought I looked like I was about 31 weeks gestation.
Whoa.
So maybe not enough to kill me over 5 days, even though it should have. But God is a sovereign God.
So, take us now 14 years later, and what happened, or what's been happening in your heart that you wanted to know more? I know that we know in adoption situations it's pretty common about that age. Was it kind of like that, where you just was asking some, because you knew you were adopted, but how did this happen, and then how did you respond when you heard that you were actually an abortion survivor?
Yeah, I cannot even tell you when I first knew that I was adopted. I've just always known. That's one of the things I love and appreciate so much about my mom and dad. They raised my older sister, who's also adopted. They raised us to know that adoption was a blessing, that our birth parents loved us enough to give us life and the gift of our family when they couldn't care for us. And so, I never questioned that. I respected that. And my parents were people of great faith. And, I thought I led a really normal life. And then lo and behold, at the age of 14, my older sister faced an unplanned pregnancy. She hadn't finished high school yet. And our parents found out that she was wrestling with what she was going to do. And so they felt like they were called to intervene for the life of their grandchild, and certainly for her life as well. And so they finally shared the secret that they had known for 14 years, that other adults in the family knew, but obviously mom and dad had kept it a secret in an attempt to protect me and probably all of us. They told her in this unplanned pregnancy about my survival from an abortion. She chose life for that child with the love and support of our family and our public school. She graduated from high school on time. And that changed my life, not only to wrap myself around my sister and my nephew, but to accidentally find out my story. Because that's how I found out. I didn't go looking for it. Yes, I had this yearning to know my biological family from an adoptee's perspective, but I never intended to go looking then. It was during an argument one night that my sister let it slip that she was more wanted by her biological parents than I was by mine. And for 2 fellow adoptees, I know, right? For 2 fellow adoptees, I was thinking, well, this is absurd, right? We are equally loved. We were equally placed. And that night, instead of arguing with me, she really softened and she said, "Oh, you don't know, do you?" And
How much older was she than
about
you,
4
Melissa?
years.
So she knew something.
She knew.
From mom and dad.
Yeah.
But they probably had not felt you were quite ready.
Right. Well, and, I don't know if you have sons or daughters, but I'm a mom of 2 girls, and that moment at the age of 14 taught me that 2 girls can talk really quickly.
Oh, yeah. We have 7 kids. We know a lot about talking.
So I think it was probably more than that. I think it was that more than anything of mom and dad were just thinking we're gonna find the right time to tell her too. Never thinking, oh, P.S., 2 teenage girls are going to talk real fast. So she got to me with information before my parents did and, didn't tell me about the survival. I mean, I don't think I would have believed her, to be honest. I mean, why would I? I didn't know things like this happen. So I sat our mom down later that night and told her about the argument and was wanting her to explain to me why my sister felt more wanted. And I'm sure you can imagine as a parent how devastating that was for my mom to have to tell me that I had survived an abortion procedure.
So what happened? How did you process that? That's pretty heavy-duty stuff.
You know, it doesn't matter how many thousands of times I've probably shared my story. I am always taken back to that living room, and I can tell you how it felt like a bomb had gone off, how I didn't want to be this person. You know, I knew in that moment of time God alone had spared my life. I felt it. That's what drives me. But I think it's really, really hard to embrace your purpose when you're in the midst of pain. I mean, isn't that the story of the human condition? We all have purpose, but we also all have pain. And so we have to figure out this way for God to deliver us from the pain to fulfill our purpose. And I will not pretend for a moment that I did well on this journey initially. I kept a lot of things a secret, as 14-year-olds can do. You know, I put on a brave face to my mom and dad. I didn't want them to be burdened by my suffering. They had suffered enough. That's what I thought in my head. I'm a reformed people pleaser. If I can carry the load for somebody, I will. And so I carried that load, and I didn't let them know how much I was hurting. And, you know, in the midst of that, really railed against my own pain, developed an eating disorder, trying to control something when I couldn't control the way I came into this world and what was done to me. I struggled with alcohol abuse because I had every raging emotion you can imagine. I started to make every poor coping choice to fill the hole that I had inside of me. And all the while, people thought I was a perfect kid, right? She gets straight A's. She's in extracurriculars. She's never caused us a problem. And I kept that a secret for a long time because I didn't want the world to know how much this hurt me. But I think what the world needed to know is that I'm just as human as everybody else, that nobody asks for this story. But in the midst of it, God rescues us time and time again. And he rescued me. He met me where I was and reminded me every single day that he had a purpose and a plan for me, greater than what I was allowing myself to live. And I think the most freeing thing that happened in my life very early on was that he allowed me to forgive my birth parents for the first time. And I say first time because this is not a one-stop destination for me. I didn't get to wake up one day and go, hey, I think I'm good. God allowed me to see their humanity.
Was that before you had the chance to meet your birth mom? Mm-hmm. You were processing that feeling of rejection and shame that went with that. Mm-hmm. How did God work in your heart to change it and to transform what was very bitter into something that was beautiful?
Yeah, we always talk about God's timing, but you know, if I'm honest, God's timing isn't always my timetable. Like I'm a type A.
Really?
Oh, really? I mean, I hope maybe you can relate to that. Yeah. I am a type A, I wanted it done yesterday, let's get it done and move on kind of person. And so having that heart of forgiveness, that first softening and that posture was really what set the stage for me to then go looking for them. So I started looking for my birth parents when I was about 19. And this is where God's timing comes in, because start looking at 19, and it took me over 10 years to find them. It took me over 10 years to search for my medical records and obtain them. Most abortion survivors actually don't even have any medical record. I mean... Do
they just destroy them, get them out, or...?
Never document it. Mm-hmm. And most abortion survivors that we find through our network are actually raised in their biological family. And most people aren't expecting that.
Oh, so the baby survives and they keep the baby. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But they never let them know that they were an abortion survivor.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of survivors don't find out until they're adults, and they've had abortions themselves. Mm-hmm. Or parents are on their deathbed, or they find a journal, or another family member starts to share the secret. But there are also survivors who, unfortunately, are raised to know their story, and not in a positive way. It's you couldn't just die like we wanted you to, right? You are such a burden. Nobody wanted you. You're the black sheep. I mean, when I say there's a dark side to this that we've never really known, that is it, right? That survivors are often raised in their biological family. And without positive support, without us breaking cycles of shame and silence, those families suffer and those survivors are targeted. So I didn't know any of those things back then. I simply thought, you know what, God wants me to offer forgiveness to my birth parents. And, you know, I would like to have my medical records. I feel like God's calling me to do something with this story. And so I need to find those medical records. And so, you know, during those 10 years, I think the most important part for me was, you know, surrendering myself to God's will, whatever that looked like, giving up my profession, right? Really reaching the end of myself and truly seeing their humanity to say, Melissa, you love them no matter what the story is, right? They're a part of you. You're a part of them. Jesus died for them as much as he did for you. Are you going to see that? And will you see that no matter what you learn? And so, you know, God's timing really was perfect in the midst of that, because I'm grateful that I learned those lessons before I found out who they were in 2007.
So Melissa, you had developed a deep kind of doctrine of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You had a theology for the cross
Mm-hmm.
and for Calvary and for the resurrection and for the gospel.
Yeah.
You've just preached the gospel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you did.
Yeah.
That's so not the case. You're now in touch with over 640 survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think is the biggest struggle that they go through in finding that out and in living out their lives knowing that that's part of their childhood?
That's such a good question. You know, part of it really depends on how they find out and when they find out. We do retreats, we do community groups and healing groups, and we train them how to be speakers and advocates, and we're now launching them later this year if they want to be ambassadors in their state, to share their story, right? This is what the world needs to see, that there is a world full of people like me. Statistically, we've done some research based on a Canadian model of data, and we know that there are likely thousands of abortion survivors every year in the United States. And so we're just getting to the point where we're going to start being able to find them and serve them more. But, you know, as I think about their stories, I think the piece that always fits, no matter what gestation the abortion occurred, no matter what type of abortion, no matter where they were raised, I think the thing about survivors is, this sounds so crazy to say if you don't know us, but we feel so unloved, so rejected by the world. And, you know, there's nothing my mom and dad could have done differently. My adoptive parents, right? My mom and dad loved me so beautifully. But the reality is babies in the womb experience the stress that their mothers go under. And then think about those of us that survive abortion attempts, the amount of stress we experienced. I mean, doctors have told me the amount of pain I must have been suffering. Like my body went to a place that I don't even want to know. So we experience the stress, and then we're born into a world that rejects us, and sometimes family rejects us. And we feel like the world the world does deny that we exist, and it won't create a safe place for us. That's what I try to do, is create a space for survivors. So we have this little hole of rejection that we are constantly trying to fill, and we think that if people knew who we were, they would never accept us or love us.
Is this becoming more and more common in the sense that we live in a pretty open culture now? Everybody's coming out of the closet with something, right?
Right.
It feels like it's actually a prime time for people to deal with who they are, and that there is, I think of Brene Brown's work on shame and vulnerabilities had a real impact around here because it's had an impact in me, so I quote her a lot. Everybody's got shame. That's kind of the message out there, and I think it's absolutely true. I minister a lot to men on this issue, but women have shame just as deeply, if not more so. I think women are more complex. I think you guys are way more complex than men. And your shame is hidden in different ways than men. It's really different. But I wonder if we're not at a time in culture and society where there is an opportunity, a divine moment right now, where we need to say, and you're doing this in your ministry, that not only can you break the power of shame through vulnerability, but that there's new hope for you. How do you communicate that to someone? Because not everybody that you're dealing with is even a Christian.
Right.
So this makes things interesting.
And not all abortion survivors are pro-life.
Right. Right.
Now, granted, I can always read through people's stories as they're saying, hey, thanks for what you do. I'm glad to know I'm not alone, but I'm pro-choice because, right, trauma. And so I then respond back to say, we support you no matter what, and I can understand why you feel the way you do right now. What I'm hearing you say is you want to prevent other children from the same suffering you've experienced. However, if we're being honest with one another, we know that ending your life is not the solution to the trauma you have faced. So there's that dynamic that happens. But you're right. I mean, really, my goal at the Abortion Survivors Network is for abortion survivors and families, right? Families, if we know that there are thousands of survivors a year, think of how many tens of thousands of families have been impacted by abortion. The cycle of shame is so huge. Even when they're raising their child in their family, right? A survivor will come to us and say, hey, I want to share my story, but my mom goes to my church. And
Wow.
She's so afraid.
Yes, of course.
So
That's the big A word, right? That we can't talk about at church.
Yeah, and shame is the big S word.
It is. It is. So you've started the Abortion Survivors Network, and it's the only healing and advocacy organization for abortion survivors?
Right.
There's nothing else out there.
There's nothing.
Well, I am so proud of you. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Thank you.
Dive into the arena and empower people to change their world. Nobody can say it better than you.
Thank you. Yeah, I always tell people either I'm like really obedient or really crazy, and sometimes it's a fine line between the two.
Outliers are always obedient and crazy. You're both. That's great. A little bit crazy. That's good. I don't think we jump in to some of the fires that the enemy has put out there without being a little bit crazy in a Holy Spirit-filled way.
Absolutely.
So be a Holy Spirit. We call it being a kingdom revolutionary. You're a kingdom of God revolutionary.
I love it. Yeah, I often say I'm a shoot first, aim later kind of gal.
Shoot, that's great. I love that. So what do you find? What are you discovering? What's been the big takeaway from jumping in and starting a ministry like this?
I have found so much joy. I think one of my favorite things has been that, people who have known me for 15 years in this work have said, Melissa, there's something different about you in the last 4 years. And usually people will say, it must be your relationship with your birth mom. And I'll always say, hey, thanks for that. I mean, she's a blessing to me. But I know what changed my life. It's walking this ministry out. It's finding my community of survivors and having a relationship and seeing their lives transformed. I mean, to me, it doesn't get any better than this.
Wow. Tell me a story. What's a really cool story, maybe even recently, without, giving away the person's identity, but what's one that's really moved your heart a lot?
Oh man, there's so many good stories. I often say, look, God made me the keeper of some really amazing stories. I will have another book coming out next January of 2024. I think I can say now publicly that it's with focus on the family. I don't know that we've been heavily marketing it, but it's been done for a while. It's the working title is Abortion Survivors Break Their Silence, and I tell about 10 other survivor stories and also some women who have had failed abortions that we've never heard from. So that's going to be really powerful for people to hear those stories. But, I think for context, knowing the world that we're living in right now, one of the stories that I want to share is about chemical abortion. So we know that chemical abortions are being pushed, and the FDA recently came out with a postal service and said, hey, we can ship chemical abortion pills no matter what state laws are. We're staying out of this, essentially, right? So we know that chemical abortions have been over 50% of abortions being performed, probably is going to creep up to like 70%. And we live in a world that kind of wants to like wash their hands and say, psh, none of my business. Well, there's always a woman affected by that. And there's also a child who is losing their life in that chemical abortion. And one of the coolest experiences I had in the last year was I got to go speak at a pregnancy center. A mom had gone there when she was facing an unplanned pregnancy. And they counseled her, provided right resources, and like many in that position, they didn't know what happened to her. She ended up going to an abortion clinic, received both chemical abortion pills, took them when she was about 7.5 weeks pregnant. And over time started to feel there's something wrong with me, there's something different about me. And the abortion clinic was never responding to her, but after a lengthy period of time, she went back to the pregnancy center because she knew that she could trust them. They knew immediately that they needed to perform an ultrasound. And they discovered she was nearly full term with a baby she took both chemical abortion pills with.
She was almost full term?
Almost full term.
Oh my goodness.
I got to hold that little guy last spring at this pregnancy center event. He'll be 2 very soon. Actually, his mom was just responding to something on Facebook today with me. I get to know the coolest people. But, I got to hold this little guy who survived both chemical abortion pills. And every survivor's life is a miracle.
It is.
And that's what I want the world to see. I mean, please stop silencing us and shaming us and making us out to be this threat to abortion. My goal is for the world to be a better place. So when that young man grows up, people will see him for the miracle that he is.
That's right. That's right. Well, Melissa, there's something in you that God placed in your heart, placed in your mind when he's forming your personality and making you the way you are, that is now being mightily used by God to touch others. What do you think has been the key to keep you going? Mm-hmm. Like there's something in you. I feel it. We've never met till today, but I feel it in you, and you're kind of a gritty guy. And I really appreciate grit. We've tried to build it into all of our 7 kids. I think some of them have it more than others, but you're gritty. Was there something in that journey from, say, 14 to where you are now where you just determined you are going to make a difference, you are going to help others? Because this is not, you've got a degree in social work. Mm-hmm. You could be doing so many other things. You got 2 kids, mm-hmm. 2 kids, 2 girls, mm-hmm. and a husband. Mm-hmm. So you keep plowing ahead. You keep digging in. You're kind of a warrior. So, gritty warrior, Melissa Ohden. So, what has God done in you to make you that way? Why do you keep doing this?
I think that's the key, isn't it? Recognizing who God created each of us to be and embracing that and not attempting to dismiss it, run away from it, do something different with it. Mm-hmm. I think I spent enough years in my early adulthood saying, Lord, could I do that one thing that I want to do? Mm-hmm. That safe, comfortable thing. Mm-hmm. And God never let the fire that burns inside of me that he placed there, he never let that go. And, my life is full of so many little God-ordained moments where when I was praying certain prayers, he was so clear to me about what he intended for me. And I often say to people, I could have led a safe, comfortable life, but when I say that, it really wouldn't have been safe and comfortable, because if I'm not chasing after him, I'm never comfortable.
Amen.
So I find this strange peace in the midst of who he made me to be.
So here's what encourages me the most about what you're saying, is the person that you are is what's going to be translated and imparted into these other women. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? You mentioned a retreat. You mentioned some kind of training that you do. How do you impart this kind of passion and focus into these women?
Women and men. So we have male survivors as well. People have a lot of questions. You don't tend to see a lot of our guys in the public eye, certainly because of what men are told about abortion, that it's none of their business. I mean, think about what that's like for a man who survived an abortion. They are left scratching their head saying, well, this is very much about me.
Let's stop you. Is it more women? I mean, when you look at the statistics in abortion, is it more women or is it about 50-50? I know more women are born. I know it's a little bit higher percentage in general.
We're scrappy. So, I mean, we are.
I agree with that.
We are.
You are.
When
Absolutely.
you look at research about premature infants, their female infants have something different about them. I mean, is that still politically correct? Can we say that?
I don't care.
So, I mean, when it comes to survivors of abortion, we don't have hard and fast numbers even of how many abortions take place and then how many survivors there are. But I can tell you in those that we serve, we probably have like 80% female that reach out to us and engage. And certainly that is cultural. And then just the difference in the way that men are wired in terms of what they're looking for. A lot of men will just reach out to us and say, hey, thanks for doing what you do. I'm so glad I'm not alone.
That's it.
Right.
Kind of keep arm's length. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And for women, because of how we're wired, right, women are more likely to engage with us and get involved in things. So how do we impart that? I mean, survivors really are fascinating because we're not who you expect us to be. We're prominent business people. I have a lot of survivors who are pastors. I mean, talk about that fire, right, that God puts in each and every one of us. So survivors are all over the place. You wouldn't even suspect that some of them are who they are. We're not typically missing limbs. We're not severely burned. I mean, yes, some of us are, but most of us walk away with very invisible scars. So be prepared. You're going to find people in your church who are probably a survivor, in your school or in your workplace. And I mean, that's how we kind of impart that passion. I mean, I think for survivors, we're hardwired for that passion because of what we survived. We want the world to be a better place. We want children to be spared from the suffering that we experienced in the first place. And then we really feel called to find community. I mean, there's something so powerful, even in the church setting, to find fellowship. Survivors are looking for people who are like them. So that in and of itself is very transformative.
So when you're doing, you say you do a retreat. Now, how often do y'all do these, and how many come, and what?
Yeah, everything. So we're kind of in this big shifting transformation, and we're going to be launching ambassadors in probably 20 states
Now, it's
later
called
this year.
ambassadors.
Yeah, the Abortion Survivors Network ambassadors. So
ambassadors, okay.
Our website is just abortionsurvivors.org. It's in the process of being revamped right now because the world has changed. And so we have even more information that we need to put out about, what is an abortion survivor and how often does it happen? And, what's the impact? Because unfortunately, once a child survives an abortion, their life isn't necessarily protected. Women are counseled to have a second abortion after an abortion fails. So for children like me, you may survive one procedure, but you aren't assured to be protected from a second one. And I'm working to change that. I mean, that's a long ball game for me when it comes to policy, to ensure that children are protected. I do a lot of advocacy work because I think God has given me a very strategic mind when it comes to seeing the big picture of it all. But we have survivors who will be launched as ambassadors. That's after they've gone through a healing curriculum that I wrote.
That's where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm curious about.
Yep.
Because people are going to be watching this, and they've come out of, they fit into the category of an abortion survivor, or they know someone who has, or they had an abortion, and they want to be healed of that too.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the things you cover when you do that?
Yeah, so in our healing curriculum, it very much is almost cognitive behavioral based. So for folks who kind of have a counseling background, and obviously, as you said, I have a social work degree. I mean, that's part of how my healing came about is, yes, I've gone to therapy. I also studied and I was a counselor. So God kind of physician heal thyself stuff that I went through. But we do a lot of just walking it out of what do you believe about yourself?
That's right.
It's
huge.
Where did that come from, right? When's the first time you heard that? Because for some survivors, it's so overwhelming. They believe something about themselves to be true, never thinking about the fact that it came out of the mouths of people who were in pain, right? So you should have just died like we wanted you to. You're such a burden. Well, okay, let's separate that for a minute and walk that out. And when did you first hear that? And who said it? And then when did that start to seep itself into your brain? And then when did it start to affect your body? Because what we think affects our body, right? It affects our emotions. And people can get so wrapped up and go through multiple traumas that it becomes like you've got this ball of yarn sitting in front of you and you can't figure out how to unravel it all. So we unravel, what do you believe about yourself and where did it come from? And what do you actually believe about yourself? What do you know to be true? And then start to identify even simple things about, what was it like in your family? What are the dynamics that existed before you were born? What are the patterns of alcoholism and trauma? And let's talk about what led your family to that place where then there was an abortion and a failed abortion, because to some extent we have to separate ourselves from our own trauma to look at it and say, wow, this involved me, but it wasn't about me. I wasn't the problem, right? These things have happened in my family.
There was a context.
Exactly.
Yeah, there was a context.
So there are things that have happened in my family for generations that have impacted where we are as a family. So it is essentially taking very internal things and separating it into what an external impact has been. But we also do things like talk about the role of forgiveness. And we talk about how to practice self-care. I look perfectly healthy, and I often say I am, except I've had shingles 12 times. My switch got turned on in the womb where my body says, you are under stress all the time. Fight or flight. Which one are you going to do, Melissa? And that's part of what you guys see in me, right? I'm a fighter, but I've walked that out to be a fighter. And so people fight or flight, and my fight has been turned on and it doesn't ever turn back off. And so for survivors to even understand that we have this dynamic about us that we're either going to run or we're going to fight, and it impacts our relationships, right? Not all of them are healthy. We're either a doormat or we don't let anybody in. Understanding all these little idiosyncrasies that maybe they couldn't make sense of, but we start to piece it together to say all of these things come from that. And there's something very empowering about that to make sense of it.
Well, it gives a point of reference, doesn't it? That you can begin to take that to the Lord. So how do an abortion survivor who's now identifying that, this process now of sanctification, this process of growth, it takes time. It's 2 steps forward and it's 1 step back, right? And sometimes it's probably 1 step forward and 2 steps back. So do people kind of come away with sort of a shock? Is it kind of shocking to realize here's someone who I've never met anyone who can identify with this thing in my life? That's got to be huge.
Yeah, it is huge. Survivors often joke and say, this is a thing? I didn't know this was a thing. And again, this is kind of my encouragement to families as well. My mom and dad did the best they could with what they had, right? They didn't have anybody to come alongside them and say, you might want to tell your kiddo that because at some point they might find out. And it's going to be better for you in the long run if you're proactive instead of reactive. Yeah. And that's part of what we are really honored to do, is to come alongside families of young survivors to say, let us help you. You're the best advocate. When the time is right for your child, But we can give you the tips and the tricks and the resources to have a conversation with your kids about abortion and failed abortions and survivors before you ultimately then say, hey, by the way, you're also one of them. So that's part of my encouragement to families, is to say, I know you think you're doing the right thing by not telling your child their story. But survivors, we watch the world and we have this feeling that we don't quite fit in with most people. And most survivors think, oh, I'm just weird, right? I feel like I'm on the outside looking in. And so if families can be honest with a survivor about what has happened, it brings peace in the long run, because they can look at it and go, oh, that makes so much sense. Yeah. I'm really not weird. I just had something happen to me.
Do you ever have opportunity to talk to the mom of the survivor? Does that ever come around? Because now it's out there. Now she's maybe even posting on Facebook or something like that. Well, your natural inclination would be, how could, mom do that to her child? Stuff like that. Do you have opportunity to process that with them and help them along too?
Yeah, even though I have a clinical social worker who that's her passion and that's her lane, I tend to run into a lot of moms just because I'm out in the public eye a lot. And one of my dearest friends had one of the first successful abortion pill reversals. So she took one abortion pill, regretted it, wanted a second chance for her child. And so she went through that process, and kiddo is healthy and getting older. I mean, gosh, he's going to be a preteen very soon. But she was one of my first examples of a mom, so much like my own, right? And she had said, Melissa, I don't know how to navigate this. What if he hates me? And even though he is kind of grown up at her feet, I mean, she's a public speaker. She's phenomenal. She's just an amazing human being. It's going to be different for him because he's been raised with the knowledge of the story. But yet at the same time, we know as kids grow up, things shift and change. And then we start to look at our parents and go, hey, wait a minute. What about that pedestal I once had you on? You mean you're a real human being, right? Things just happen. And I hear that a lot from moms who will say, I'm just so afraid of them knowing their story. I don't want them to hate me. And again, that's where all of us come in. I mean, if you are willing to be honest about the suffering of abortion, we as the church can change families so that women don't feel that shame. That we can say, you know what, we don't know all of your circumstances, but we know the struggle. And we're here for you. Everybody makes mistakes. Yes, some of them have dire consequences. However, you're not alone.
Melissa, is there an age that you counsel moms, dads to talk to their kids about what happened?
It's tough because, even as a social worker, I can't pinpoint a perfect age. Sometimes parents will wait until their child is about 17, 18, because at least some of the tumultuous teenage years can settle down. But at the same time, the longer we wait, the more that child has a tape inside of their head about who they are, what their story is, and who, especially if they're an adoptee, who their biological parents are, right? There's a narrative that we hold about ourselves and about people who are close to us. So it does become complicated the longer we have a particular tape to undo that tape. But, we have actually served a couple of 10-year-olds in the last couple of years. 10 seems to be a really sweet spot for the families that we've served when we do this the right way. And, I will forever treasure getting to meet one of these 10-year-olds on a Zoom. The mom, our social worker, had worked with the adoptive parents. They set the stage and over a period of time got to the place where they told her story. And God's redemption is what we never can expect it to be sometimes, because those parents got to tell her, you're not alone. I know other people like you. And honest to goodness, if my parents would have known that when I was 14, my life could have been different. I truly believe that my life would have been different if I would have known that there was even one person like me.
And now there is.
Yeah.
Because of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are you finding that there's a new kind of redemption that comes with community?
Oh, absolutely. It brings me so much joy. I mean, I was at the March for Life recently, and we had about 15 abortion survivors there for the first time, carrying signs that say, "Babies survive abortions, I'm one of them." In nearly 50 years of Roe and marches, we never had a presence of abortion survivors.
That's incredible. That took a lot of courage.
It took so much courage of
You're
them.
really a brave person. And I feel like people who identify shame in any area of their life and are willing to be vulnerable about it. Around here, we talk about bloodstained allies, having bloodstained allies that it's not just an accountability group, but it's also people who can say, I've got your back. Mm-hmm. I've been through similar things, and they can share that. And then there's a sense of camaraderie. Mm-hmm. That's why we call them allies. And you're doing that. Mm-hmm. And that's it's unbelievable. It's so beautiful. I mean, I didn't know anything about this until we started working on some stuff related to bringing you in and everything. Mm-hmm. You're a brave person.
I think there is such bravery in being vulnerable. And that's why, the answer is hard but yet simple about how we change the world, because it starts with us.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Melissa, how can people get in touch with you? You got the book that is already out, which is You Carried Me, but you're talking about 2024 with Focus on the Family. There's a book coming out, which is going to be 10 stories of abortion survivors.
Yeah, something like that. I've lost track at this point. I've been working on it for so long, but it's co-written with another best-selling author, and it's going to include resources for people to be educated about failed abortions and abortion survivors, and even kind of have like a reference of what kind of organizations exist in the pro-life movement and what do they do, because I don't expect everybody to know what is out there, and if I can impart that wisdom to people, I'm just honored to do it. So yeah, people can be on the watch for that next book. My particular website, and I'll be honest, because I focus so much on the Abortion Survivors Network, sometimes my content isn't updated well. But my website is melissaohden, OHDEN.com. For the Abortion Survivors Network, it's abortionsurvivors.org. And it's going to be so amazing so soon with these resources that we're putting out, not only for survivors, but for even adoptive parents, biological parents, policymakers, just the general public to get educated. Because I don't expect everybody to know what I know. So it's my job to bring that to people. And people can find us all over social media. Our handles are at the Abortion Survivors Network. My handles are at Melissa Ohden.
That's so awesome. Well, Melissa, it's been an honor to have you on Empower You, because you're empowering people to change their world. And that's what it's all about. And so I want to thank all of you that were with us. You've got those websites and ways to get in touch with Melissa. But I just encourage you to check out what Melissa's doing and the network that's just growing and is going to have just greater impact in the days ahead. And it's an honor to have you here. So bless you.
Thank you.
So great to have you here.